Hi there! I'm coming to you guys from beautiful scenic Regina, Saskatchewan to possibly start a conversation on why the Canadian, specifically the Saskatchewan Wildlife Act, should be revised. So let's start out at the beginning here. I work at a major Canadian pet store brand, and I've only been working there for 6 months, but I've recently, throughout the whole time, it's really come to my attention that people are keeping captive amphibians and captive reptiles quite regularly. It's very common practice. When I first came across this, I assumed it was illegal. In a lot of areas it is illegal to keep captive animals, specifically, amphibians and reptiles. So many are endangered, so many are threatened. So, especially if you're not an expert, you don't know if that's the case. So I just assumed that this was going to be illegal, right? It's not, doesn't seem like a cool thing to do. Upon looking further into it, in Saskatchewan, it is actually generally okay. The Saskatchewan Wildlife Act generally does let you keep captive reptiles and amphibians, and pretty much everything else without a license. I mean, beavers, badgers, I don't know why you're keeping a badger, but, you're allowed to, and, the Act has pretty minor restrictions on this, which I think is very weird. For example, you can keep a beaver. You can keep a beaver in Saskatchewan. You go out and catch yourself a beaver, you don't need a license. You need, a 6-foot square bathing pool to keep a beaver. That seems like a big deal to me. A badger? Who's gonna keep a badger? Crows. You're not allowed to keep ravens. I think that's not on there, but all amphibians, all reptiles, all kinds of stuff. You're allowed to catch it out of the wild, keep it. There are a few restrictions on this. It says, you have to keep these animals in, sanitary conditions where ample water is provided, etc., etc. But, there's no way to police that. If you hand people something that says, yeah, you can go catch a beaver and keep it in captivity, they're gonna interpret that as, yeah, free beavers. They're gonna take them, and, once somebody has an animal, they're not necessarily gonna broadcast that. And this is where issues arise, particularly with reptiles and amphibians, which is my area that I really enjoy. I keep reptiles. I work in a reptile department. I really, really like herpetology. I really particularly I've grown up in northern Saskatchewan for most of my life. I come from BC, but, I'm really used to just, swampy areas and, plains and frogs and salamanders and all kinds of neat things, and it really kind of disturbs me that even though these animals are disappearing around Canada and around the world, there are no restrictions on them in Saskatchewan, especially because I still go back to northern Saskatchewan routinely. There still are a lot of frogs. You still come across salamanders here. You still come across garter snakes. There are species of garter snakes that are endangered, and people don't necessarily know that. But that is such a privilege to us here, and I think people should respect that. And I think that our government shouldn't condone people keeping things that are disappearing. And I know it's a big deal to go through revising an act, but it's worth it. And what are we going to do as Saskatchewan, as a group of people, if we aren't protecting Saskatchewan, and if our children aren't going to grow up with these animals and aren't going to grow up with this fully fledged ecosystem, what is that? Anyways, so I'm going to go into some reasons why it is actually bad for people to keep captive animals, aside from what I've just said. So like I said, I have a particular interest in reptiles and amphibians because they're going away. And I just think they're amazing. I'll show you my gecko later, but, a couple things that arise are, especially amphibians, like salamanders, tiger salamanders, there's a few kinds of skink, not in Saskatchewan necessarily, but in Canada, we have all kinds of interesting reptiles, but amphibians particularly, salamanders, very hard to keep correctly. A tiger salamander should theoretically have, 3 feet of burrowing space, just to kind of go down and hide for the winter, all that kind of stuff, and people aren't providing that. For example, a pretty general thing that I would get when people come in to my pet store and ask me about this, they'll be like, me and my kid caught a tiger salamander, and I want to keep this tiger salamander, and, I've got it in, a Rubbermaid tub with, an inch of dirt I found outside with, perlite in it, and, Tupperware container full of water inside the Tupperware container, and I'm feeding it, like, I don't know, pet store worms or something. And as much as people, like, in this kind of, like, goldfish bowl kind of a mentality think that's okay, that's not okay. That's very cruel. Like, it's in the same way, yeah, you can't keep a goldfish in a bowl. It's cruel. They'll probably live for a while, but do you want to keep a cat in a box? Like, it's terrible. And people think, like, it's just kids just catching stuff, and, like, to a degree, I think that's fair. Like, I kept many a frog when I was a kid, but for adults to condone this, that's a whole different deal. Secondly, if people are keeping let's say Tammy goes out and he catches, like, an endangered toad, and he's like, it just looks like all the other toads, and then he takes that into his house and keeps it for a while, and let's say Tammy keeps it with, like, his African clawed frogs, I don't know, and Tammy's frog contracts a disease that isn't native to Saskatchewan, and then releases that toad, and that toad goes back to all his toad friends, and they all get that can actually be detrimental to groups, and that's a big deal. Another thing, this is a bit smaller of an issue, I feel, but it's worth noting. If people are allowed to just keep animals, a lot of animals do spread zoonotic diseases, and I feel it's weird for a government to condone people keeping things that can make them sick, especially since people aren't necessarily educated in that. And that is a danger. Just all those things put together, I will probably continue on this at some point, but yeah, it's very weird that that in Saskatchewan people are allowed to keep whatever they want. I feel it's really, like, a shortcut. I feel like it's an act that hasn't been dealt with in a long time, and especially, I feel like if you could get together a good argument, get together some statistics about the decline of reptiles and amphibians, and just how, like, dangerous or it can be to keep small animals, or how unlikely it is for people to keep these animals in proper conditions, I think you could raise a really good argument to the Saskatchewan legislature. Another thing, if you really, like, it's your dream to keep beavers, or, like, you really want a tiger salamander, or, like, you really want a badger, or a deer, or, like, whatever, well, that's game farming, that's a whole different deal, but you could get a license. Like, does the average person really need to keep, like, a badger? I don't think they do. If it's really that big of a deal to you, people should have to go out and get a license. It's just a weird way of doing things, a weird way of setting things up, and I think people should talk about it. I think people should talk about it and raise more issues than what I've just said, because there definitely are more issues than that, and I think things would start to move, because it really is a strange policy. And I just personally really don't like the idea of people keeping these animals in unsanitary conditions. I don't like the idea of people theoretically accidentally taking endangered animals out of the wild and keeping them and killing them by accident because they don't know how to take care of them. That stuff is up to people who are in that field. And if you really, like, want to study whatever, any of these animals, license. You should have to get a license. That's about all I have to say for now. I might come back to this, but I hope that gets you guys thinking, and I hope that, I don't know, go petition legislature, like, help me out here. This is a big deal, and it needs to be talked about. Alright.